Kia ora mai tātou. Tēnā koe i te tuahine, nā I whakatau mai I ahau, me tō reo a tāua. O te rā, kia koutou katoa, ko tai mai, tēnā koutou. Ko rangitāni tēnei ko hoki mai ki te haukainga, ko raukaua hoki, e mihi atu kia koutou, tēnā koutou, kia ora tātou katoa. Life is not devoid of struggle, and it is through that we have an analysis of our own power and strength and of our history. Struggle is easily perceived as a negative, yet if I think about some of the activities people choose to engage in for leisure and pleasure, they often include purposeful struggle. In which case, struggle might be better cited in the positive realm. So I'm thinking of things such as struggling to complete a marathon physical event, struggling to achieve top marks in an assignment, struggling to eat the last piece of cake, struggling to find the words to tell someone special that you love them, and the list goes on. Maybe it's just a play on words, and if it is, I say perceptions in life are all about playing with words. Through playing with words, we play with thoughts and perceptions, and we can find a place of optimism and peace with how things are. When I create my space of optimism and peace, I'm a stronger mother, I'm a more learned friend, I'm a caring daughter, I'm a more effective student, and I'm happy and free to explore and roam. In my circles, we are pretty much all aware of the history of fighting of our peoples and the off-warrior nature of the lives of many of our tūpuna. Te rangi tōpiora is one of those tūpuna, known as a warrior princess to some, he wahine toa, he wahine tūtika hei tiaki I ai anō, I te whenua, I ngā tupuranga whaimuri ake. She's who I draw my strength from. Ka whawhai tonu mātou is a catch cry shared by many of us, born of the days of hikoi and struggle, just a matter of decades ago and still within our lifetime. So we continue to fight for our land, our sea, our rivers and our birds, our children, our mothers and our fathers. It's a fight to retain them in our kaitiakitanga, to maintain them and glorify them as they so deserve, and has been done for many generations before me. Recently I was asked if I would be prepared to put my baby on the line in battle for the land, and forced to consider fully what my real life politics are. Sorry, we can't escape politics. My preparedness for battle of a different nature than I'm familiar with in everyday speak. My baby was 2 years old at this time. Tutengaehe is her name. To stand strong and breathe and speak with strength is what it means. She's stunning, her first language is Maori, and she comes of land and of people who have fought to still be here. The battles have cost lives, the battles have maintained and retained the life and kaitiakitanga of our mother Papatuanuku. So my response back to that question of life or death of my baby for land was to rephrase the question, would I be prepared to put my mother on the line and battle for my baby? Or would I see the death of my mother for the life of my baby? The land is my mother, she is I, she is my baby, and to lose Papatuanuku is to ultimately lose all. To lose what is present, past and future. So my answer is yes, I would fight. I would fight for my baby and I would fight for my mother. To save Papatuanuku is to save Pepe. Would I lose my baby for my mother by choice? Never. Ko tō uri whaimuri I o koutou tapu mai. Your offspring follow in your footsteps. What point is the land if there is no one to walk on her? What point is a mother without children? What point is the battle when those for whom we fight no longer exist? Kia ora tātou. That was just a little excerpt out of my doctoral thesis. One, because if you don't read bits out of it, people never do. Two, because one of the points I wanted to make today in terms of Māori and sexual and reproductive health is that that our belief, or the belief of some of us, is that we need to maintain, or we need to refocus Māori sexual and reproductive health into the context of our everyday lives. And that's a little bit of my everyday life. So I want us to remember that when we're speaking with each other about sexual and reproductive health, there are billions of other things that are going on in our lives. Today, issues for us as Māori, and these are probably issues that are shared by a number of you in the audience, include things like concern around water rights and what's going to happen in the next few weeks in terms of the government trying to lobby with particular iwi to have the water rights signed over so that asset sales can proceed. Another issue, marriage equality, that's bringing up some really courageous conversations in amongst Māori and Pacific and other communities to do with sexuality, and ultimately raising also conversations around sexual and reproductive health. Mining and drilling, those are just a few of the issues that I think when I talk with families with hapu and iwi around sexual and reproductive health, I have to kind of know about those things to know the context in which I'm asking them to think about my area of sexual and reproductive health. So it's about, what I'm going to talk with you about this morning is making sure that we keep in context Māori sexual and reproductive health in the context of health, but in the context of our broader lives as well. The other thing I wanted to mention at the start is that we've had 3, 4, I think, presentations that have come from Māori members of the audience and of the conference, and you will notice that there are differences and there are similarities amongst our presentations. Somebody else presented, I can't remember who, but spoke about one size not fitting all. And I want you to keep that in mind when you listen to the variety of Māori views on sexual and reproductive health. Just as there are numerous views of sexual and reproductive health amongst non-Māori, so there are amongst ourselves. So don't go, oh, but Mera said this, but Lynn said that. We work with and we talk with a number of different whānau, hapu and iwi, and so we are going to come up with a variety and a diverse range of viewpoints on the topic. Okay, move through. So my present research is around trying to determine what are some of the Māori views of sexual and reproductive health. These are the project objectives, looking at providing a space for discussion and analysis of Māori whānau and provider views on resistance and wellbeing as it applies to the sector that we're working in. So the notion of resilience is one that probably many of you who work in health are familiar with. The notion of resistance is a part of that continuum of keeping ourselves well. Resistance, however, is probably a more proactive term, and it's a term that a number of us working in Māori health with whānau and hapu are feeling increasingly more comfortable with. Resilience tends to talk about the bounce back. When something happens to you, how is it that you bounce back from that adversity to find a space of well-being again? So it's a reactive strategy in that instance. Very necessary because shit happens and we need strategies and ways to deal with those things that come before us. Resistance, on the other hand, proactive, it talks about resisting those things happening to us in the first place, and I think that we can apply both strategies of resilience and resistance into the sexual and reproductive health sector. So that's one of the things I'm looking at. One of the outcomes that I hope comes about is that we'll be able to provide recommendations for policy, provider and whānau level interventions in relation to the sector, with a focus on reduction of STIs. So we're looking to develop a Kaupapa Māori model of resistance and wellbeing for the sector. and highlighting whānau views and whānau relationships as the basis for improved sexual health. And the project that Dr. Lynn Petty has just completed and spoke to a number of you about just earlier in the conference is one that also explored that. So I'm looking forward to seeing both the similarities and differences between our projects. And again, just a little bit of context. One of the underlying assumptions or understandings of the project is that poor health needs to be, and poor sexual health included in that, needs to be viewed in the political context. If we don't do that, then we risk blaming the victims of poor health for their health and therefore making them solely responsible for getting well. If viewed in the political context, then we can look for policies and action that are going to assist individuals and whānau to take responsibility in a real supportive community context. Maori is probably one of the key concepts that's contained within the Māori health and wellbeing framework that we're going to look at just shortly. And it can be viewed as one of the things which is central to Māori health and wellbeing. My approach to Maori, I guess I first started looking at it in terms of my PhD study, so there's quite a bit of relatively in-depth writing around the concept in there if you're interested in studying it further. But just to note, for people that have seen the term Maori in other health literature and spaces, it's usually spelt with an A. I'm not misspelling it when I put an O, and lots of people think I am. So just to explain that, that I'm privileging the Taranaki dialect, and that is in itself a strategy to revitalise and encourage the revitalisation of language differences that exist amongst our iwi and Aotearoa. Essentially, Māori talks about life force, life essence and beyond, and there are lots of oral narratives that engage in Māori and point to it being quite central to our health and wellbeing. So the framework that I'm going to talk to you about now is known as the Mana Kaitiakitanga framework. It's a general Māori health and wellbeing framework. We first started developing it in the late 90s with Dr. Hui Whakapiripiri and a number of students that I was working with at that time from Taranaki. And the reason that I'm interested in working with this framework as a potential framework for application in the sexual and reproductive health sector is that I'm interested in bringing the conversations around sexual and reproductive health back into the general health conversation, the general health framework. I think that one of the issues, and this comes from early discussions amongst advisory group members for my project and a number of whānau, is that in order for us to talk about sexual and reproductive health, we need to be able to talk about it in a less clinical way, in a way that opens up the communication to people who don't have the clinical knowledge in the first place. But Māori know well about talking about sexual and reproductive health. It's just that we need to open the doors in the right spaces. So what we're looking at is applying this, as I said, to the sector and exploring how the values and philosophies within this framework might be applied to those kinds of conversations. It's about assisting us to remember and realise again how critical sexual and reproductive health is to our survival. It's about a focus on whakapapa, on genealogy, a focus on resistance and a focus on general well-being. So, contained within the centre of this framework are what we view as principles of well-being for Māori. Not universally held, as I said, we're all pretty different, but these are certainly concepts that people seem to understand generally throughout our families in hapu and iwi, and we've put them together in this framework. So what I'd like you to do now, because it's the coming towards the last speaker of the afternoon, and I know you'd be tempted to nod off, but congratulations for being here, by the way. What I'd like you to do is just, looking at those, have a conversation with the person next door to you just for a minute about what you think your own principles of health and wellbeing are. Okay, kia ora no tātou. Thanks for that. That's an example of the kind of way that that I might start some of the conversations when we get into interview stage. So I'll be exploring questions like, what are your own principles of wellbeing, which you've just talked about, asking people to think about how those are influenced or derived from just themselves, their own experiences, and or how are those influenced and derived from their family beliefs, their hapu and their iwi. And for some interviews, of course, we'll stop at the family or whānau area, because not all of us remain connected to hapu or iwi. And as Lynn Petty talked about earlier today, that there's a broad understanding of whānau that includes peers. So it's not something that relies on people being hugely identified with the Maori base of whānau, hapu and iwi. We need to think really broadly in that. Also talking about things like how do those principles of health and well-being apply to your relationships and to how we think or talk or keep silent about our sexual and reproductive health. And the other thing I wanted people just to consider is think about, if people don't come from experiences of being well very often, or if being unwell is much more prevalent in their lives, how do you think that impacts on their ability to have a sense of principles of well-being? Because that is the case and the reality for lots of our people, hey? We, Māori feature high in all the wrong health statistics, so it makes sense that a lot of the people that we'll be talking to have much more experience with being unwell. So it's kind of about us, when we're asking those questions, keeping that in mind. I think the things that help us to understand the importance of exploring and developing and then sharing or working from Māori frameworks of health and wellbeing. So these are the states of being that underlie the framework, and I haven't got enough time at going through this framework in a really full way and giving you a full understanding of it. Could be a 1-2 day or a week-long wānanga. But just to say that these states of being are really important concepts for us to understand and to acknowledge as things that impact on and influence our health and well-being. But there are, we're now privy to quite a lot of research if we go outside of sexual and reproductive sector into the broader Māori health sector and even into Māori education research, where these kinds of concepts have been talked about and researched, and people have spoken on them in quite a number of different sectors and different forums. So there is access to information about these things if you're interested. And those, of course, are the 7 key elements that sit in the midst of the framework. I forgot actually to talk about the images. I'll just flip back. The images that are throughout most of this presentation were taken by a photographer whose name is Serena Stevenson, and they were taken around the time that my own moko kauwai was applied. And I've used them here because they are reflective of that thing that I was talking about earlier, the concept of Māori. Māori is something that's really present with the application of moko. So that's just to note where the images are from. And then these later slides that I pulled in yesterday just have a mixture of the photos that were on my laptop at the time. And this is my little girl, Tutengaehe. So I just really quickly wanted to do some myth busting about Māori speaking in terms of sexual and reproductive health, and the early literature that I've reviewed so far in this project tells me that we know well how to talk about sexual and reproductive health. We have had many conversations about sex, sexuality and so on, and we do it in the language of song, the language of comedy, the language of carving and the language of haka. So those are the spaces where we hear, both traditionally and in contemporary times, the way that we can talk about sex and sexuality. One of the things though that I note, and I'm remembering conversations with a couple of kaumātua, is that when we do it best, it's that language of comedy quite often, and it's within our own language, it's within Te Reo Māori. So there are many words and ways that we know about speaking about sex and sexuality that have not necessarily transferred from Māori into English. And because of the process of colonisation, which has denied many of us the ability to speak our own language, many of us have also lost the ability to speak about sex and sexuality. But it is not something that was traditionally taboo in the experiences that I've had in talking with various kaumātua. It is something that we were really comfortable about. In terms of the language of carving, you only need to look at heaps of our carved Meaty Mouses to see penises as big as ever, and boobs hanging out and all sorts of things. And no, those aren't the words that we typically use to describe them, because it's not really appropriate. Those are our tupuna. But the words that I would generally use to describe those things are in Te Reo Māori. But I just want you to know that that we can talk about it. So through projects such as Lynn's, also the work that Alison Green is undertaking in her doctoral study, and the project that I've talked with you about now, through that we hope to remind people of that, and remind people of the ways that we have talked, and get that talk happening again. I'll finish the slides there. I was going to give you an idea of some of the questions, but I'd rather give you a chance to ask any questions quickly. That's my email if you've got questions that go beyond the time we've got here. And I want to acknowledge Te Kua Waitapu, which is the organisation that has in part funded my attendance here and encouraged me throughout my study, and I sit on the board of Te Kua Waitapu, and also Te Kotahi Research Institute, which is the organisation that I work for at the University of Waikato. Kia ora tātou.